Here we go. From the Silver Creek Studios, I'm Jared, and this is the BFIBs Almanac. On this week's pinch hit episode, I'm going to discuss my personal favorite players from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. But first, I'd like to invite you to get a hold of the show on Twitter and Instagram at BFIBs Almanac, or email bfibsalmanac@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, BFIBs Almanac Podcast. And if you want to change it up and try something different, check out my other podcast, Get a Load of This. It's lots of fun, all over the map with topics and discussion, controversy, vulgarity, who knows. Get a load of this. So, just wanted to keep it quick and light on this episode, not too crazy with statistics. We will get into some achievements here. But I just wanted to share my personal favorite players. These are not necessarily who I think were the best players in these eras. Just guys that stood out to me, whether I was a kid or as an adult watching games with my kids. Guys that stood out for various reasons. So again, not necessarily the best players. And you might find that some of the best players are left off my list here. So I only went with 4 guys in each era. 3 position players and a pitcher, and I have some honorable mentions in there. So without further ado, let's dive into the 80s. So I was a kid in the 80s, first became a Cardinals fan in the 80s, and who could be a Cardinals fan and not love Ozzie Smith? 13 Gold Gloves, 15-time All-Star, Silver Slugger Award in 87, and was the 85 NLCS MVP. Greatest defensive shortstop ever, definitely in my lifetime, I'm pretty sure ever. The Wizard, the backflips, the 6-fingered glove. Just what more could you ask for an icon in St. Louis from Ozzie Smith, number 1. Next up, Vince Coleman. Maybe a surprise pick for some people. Not for everybody. One of my favorites. Rookie of the Year in 85. Led the National League 6 times and all of the majors 3 times in stolen bases, starting with his rookie year, 110, the next year, 107, 109, 81, 65, 77. So those first 3 seasons especially, 100-plus stolen bases, relatively unheard of. Obviously we had Rickey Henderson, but those numbers just stand out so far beyond everybody else, and especially from the leaders in today's game. I looked the other day, and Billy Hamilton, I don't think, has had a season above the 60s. And the highest total I could find from the last several seasons, decade plus, was 70. So it's a different game now than it was back then. The running Redbirds, epitomized by Vince Coleman. You just don't see that anymore. And it was incredible to see back then, kind of that iconic in stride, stealing second, stealing third, stealing home for that matter, Vince Coleman. All right, next up, Jack Clark, the slugger, 4-time All-Star, 2-time Silver Slugger Award in 85 and 87. Led the National League 3 times, all of the majors twice in walks, and led in OPS in 1987. Had a career high of 35 home runs. His next highest was 28. So even though he was by far considered the slugger in the 80s for the Cardinals, not really a home run hitter by today's standards. I mean, 35 is good. And in the upper 20s, really good, solid home run hitter. But, we're used to thinking 25 is kind of average. In the 30s is pretty good. You'd rather see in the 40s, and then obviously 50 and up would be great. But so a little different game, but still that iconic slugger, playoff contributor, all-time favorite, Jack Clark. And for my pitcher, lots of pitchers to choose from these 80s teams, but a guy that I always kind of loved to see pitch, that hulking presence on the mound, Todd Worrell, Rookie of the Year in 86, three-time All-Star, led the National League twice, the majors once in saves with 36, 33, 32, 20 with the Redbirds, and later on 32, 44, 35. So some really impressive seasons with save totals. And he just kind of had that big kind of slouching, hunched over presence on the mound. Really fun to watch. So some of the honorable mentions from the 80s, I've got, of course, Willie McGee, Terry Pendleton, Tommy Herr, Joaquin Andujar, Bob Forsch, John Tudor, so many others. But I could pretty much list anybody from the playoff seasons, 82, 85, 87, and couldn't go wrong. But those are my favorites. So Ozzie, Vince, Jack, and Todd Worrell. Now, from the 90s, this was a little bit, not tough, but there were some pretty mediocre teams in the 90s, but we had some good teams too and some great players. First up on my list is Brian Jordan, dual sport athlete, kind of under the radar compared to, let's say, Ray Langford. He's kind of that prototypical 90s Cardinals outfielder, but Brian Jordan, to me, was a little more fun to watch. He definitely, in my mind, had that more athletic presence to him. Just knowing that he was this football player too kind of had this fun fan appeal to it. In his WAR, he had a 7.0, a 5.5, and a 5.2. Those are all really good WAR numbers, which nobody was paying attention to WAR back then, but I looked him up and was pleasantly surprised to see some WAR values that got that high. His highest career home run total was 25 in 98. I believe he did it again in another season. So not like a stereotypical power home run hitter, but he's hitting 25 home runs. He's playing stellar defense. He's stealing bases for you. Brian Jordan. Next up, Mark McGwire. Everybody knows him. Everybody loves him. 70 home runs in 98, 65 home runs in 99. Led the majors twice in OPS and walks. Led the majors 4 times in home runs. You can't hardly think of anybody else but McGwire when you think of Cardinals slugger. He just kind of imposed, his will on pitchers on the ball. If you recall the home run derby in Boston where he was just jacking shots over the Green Monster in Fenway, it was just insane to watch. Now we all know the controversy behind him, but at that era, so many guys were doing the same thing, and he stood out head and large shoulders above the rest. Matt Morris, my pitcher from the 90s, second in Rookie of the Year voting in 97, 2-time All-Star, had a 3.61 ERA in St. Louis, a 1.26 whip in St. Louis, and 22 wins in 2001, was third in the Cy Young voting that year. I don't know if he gets forgotten, so to speak, but he's not really considered an icon among Cardinals players, but he really put up solid numbers for a long time, contributed to some very competitive teams, and I'll always kind of remember him in the All-Star game with the Darryl Kyle tribute, the DK57 on his palms that he showed to the camera when lined up before the game. So very emotional, great player, great guy, Matt Morris. Last on my list is kind of out of left field a little bit, so to speak, Tom Pagnozzi, catcher, 3-time Gold Glove, 1-time All-Star. He doesn't have the long-time track record with the Cardinals. He was there a long time, but he was only a starter full-time for a few years. He was a backup, split time for several years. Never was a guy that stood out offensively. Obviously, he had the Gold Gloves a few years there. He was very good defensively, but not someone you really think of as a classic, iconic Cardinal. But for whatever reason, at the age I was at, it was always just kind of fun to see Pags back there. And always had a smile on his face, seemed to play the game hard. I just like Tom Pagnozzi. So, honorable mentions in the 90s, Ray Langford, Jose Oquendo, the secret weapon, Bernard Gilkey, Dennis Eckersley, and Lee Smith. Got some Hall of Famers in there, some fan favorites in there. It was kind of tough to pick, but those are the 90s. For the 2000s, now this to me is kind of, the 80s will always be that classic Cardinals era to me as a kid, but the 2000s was really what I consider to be the pinnacle of Cardinals players and teams and achievements. Jim Edmonds, 8-time Gold Glove winner, 4-time All-Star, Silver Slugger in 04, part of that MV3 in 04, had a career 903 OPS, greatest center fielder I've ever seen, almost 400 home runs. I think he was 7 shy of 400. It's a shame, a shocking shame, that he was eliminated from the Hall of Fame ballot after just one ballot. I can't imagine how he got that few votes. One of the greatest defensive outfielders of all time, definitely the best center fielder I've witnessed. And, he hit plenty of home runs, way more, almost 100 more than Edgar Martinez, who just got elected to the Hall of Fame. Obviously different positions and different situation there, but still, one of the all-time fan favorites, everybody loves, Jimmy Ballgame, Jim Edmonds. Scott Rowland, Rookie of the Year in 97 with the Phillies. 8-time Gold Glove winner, 7-time All-Star, Silver Slugger winner in 02. Again, part of that MV3 in 04. Greatest third baseman I've ever seen. There's Brooks Robinson, there's Mike Schmidt, and now we got Nolan Arenado. We've had the pleasure to watch some of the greatest defenders ever in the game in our lifetime now. And Scott Rowland was definitely one of those. Played the game the right way, played tough, played hard, no real attitude out there. Definitely was a leader. He pushed his teammates. I love the way he nearly ran around the bases when he'd hit a home run. No showboating. Basically, he's the prototypical ball player that you would want your kids to grow up to be. If they could be like anybody, you'd want them to be like Scott Rowland. Or the next guy, Albert Pujols, Rookie of the Year in 01, 2-time Gold Glove winner, 6-time Silver Slugger winner, 10-time All-Star, batting title in 03, again part of that MV3 in 04, 3-time MVP, and the greatest ever 10-year run, I think, in the history of the game. Achieved things that no one has ever done for 10 consecutive seasons. Obviously, rubbed some fans the wrong way with his departure. His performance has tailed off over the last several years. He's not the player that he once was, but he will go down as one of the greatest Cardinals of all time. Maybe, top 3 Cardinals of all time. Amazing to watch. Did some things on the field that we never thought we would see. Crushed Houston Astros fans. Crushed their hearts and their dreams in the 05 NLCS. Even though we didn't go on to win that series, when he took Brad Lidge deep, every Cardinal fan rejoiced, stood up, arms outstretched, screaming and cheering. So never forget Pujols. I'm a little upset with him, but he's a good guy, great player, Albert Pujols. My pitcher from the 2000s era, I don't see how you could pick anybody else. Carp, the real Carp, Chris Carpenter. Cy Young Award in 05, 3-time All-Star, ERA title in 09, 3.07 ERA in St. Louis, 1.125 whip in St. Louis, 21 wins in 05. Fiercest pitcher I've seen. I never had the joy of watching Bob Gibson pitch, but I have to imagine Chris Carpenter is right up there with him in intensity and competitiveness. I always said, when my son was a pitcher, I wanted him to pitch like Chris Carpenter. Not performance-wise, of course, that'd be great, but with the intensity, the attitude, the competitiveness of Chris Carpenter. And I tell anybody who ever asks about pitching, if you want to emulate somebody, emulate Chris Carpenter. All-time great Cardinal. My favorite pitcher ever to watch, Chris Carpenter. Honorable mentions from the 2000s. Rick Ankiel, Mike Matheny, Woody Williams, Eckstein, Waino, and Yachty. Now, I could put them in the 2010s too, but they crept into that 2000s honorable mentions. Now, wrapping it up with the 2010s, the latest generation of Cardinals. And of course, the greatest of the current generation of Cardinals, Yadier Molina, 9-time Gold Glove winner, 4-time Platinum Award winner, 9-time All-Star, 2013 Silver Slugger Award. Only 4 seasons of more than 55 strikeouts, and all 4 of those were the last 4 seasons. So the beginning of his career, he always had less than 55 strikeouts. Amazing. For a guy who's never really been known offensively, he's obviously coming around the last several seasons. But for a guy to strike out as little as he does, to have that control over the plate and over the bat and put the ball in play is incredible. Not to mention his defensive prowess, his ability to throw out runners and control the running game, his ability to call the pitching game, to make average pitchers amazing, to make really good pitchers great, to have the respect of the entire pitching staff and the entire team and the entire management the way he does is incredible. One of the all-time best, Yadi. My pitcher from this group is Waino. We mentioned him in the honorable mentions of the 2000s, but here he is in the 2010s. 2-time Gold Glove winner, 3-time All-Star, Silver Slugger, of all things, in 2017, a 3.32 ERA, a 1.213 whip. The 2006 World Series closer had 20 wins one season, 19 wins to lead the National League another season, and 19 again to lead all the majors in another season. True competitor. Now, I don't put him in the same league as I do Chris Carpenter, but he is one of the all-time best Cardinals pitchers. Uncle Charlie, the nasty curveball, what made him famous, what makes him most effective, even to this day, has that similar competitiveness and toughness as Carpenter. I don't think it's quite there, but definitely a nasty pitcher and a great guy. By all accounts, everybody who knows Waino loves him. Great teammate, great dad, great community representative, great Cardinal, Adam Wainwright. Matt Holliday, 7-time All-Star, 4-time Silver Slugger, a batting title in 07, NLCS MVP in 07, and RBI leader in 07. Kind of was always underappreciated as a Cardinal. I think when he signed that $100 million contract, people expected, 30 to 40 home runs a year from him. He's never really been that guy. He's always been a 20 to 25 home run guy. But he's going to hit 300 for you. He's going to knock in 100 RBIs. He's going to play solid defense. I don't think he was ever as bad in the outfield as some people made it out to be. But also kind of that quiet leader type, very competitive, protected Albert for years and years. One of my favorites to watch, hit the ball hard, line drives. You want to hit line drives, and he is your line drive power hitter. Matt Holliday. Last on my list is Lance Berkman. Kind of a surprise choice here, but 6-time All-Star. We would not have won the 2011 World Series without him. I hated the guy in Houston. He was a Cardinal killer, one of the killer bees. Couldn't stand him. But once he came here, and I got to actually, hear him talk to the fans and see him around other players, I realized how cool of a guy he was. How great of a teammate he was, and for that, couple of years he was here, how great of a Cardinal he was. Like I said, we wouldn't have won that series without him, and he'll always go down as a fan favorite here in St. Louis. Lance Berkman. So honorable mentions from the 2010s, David Freese, Carlos Beltran, Matt Carpenter, Skip Schumacher, Kyle Loesch, and Happy Flight Rafael Furcal. People will probably forget about Furcal as a Cardinal, but I really do think he had huge contributions to the playoff runs that they went on, and just bringing that happy flight attitude to the team with that kind of extra competitiveness. Let's try to win this one so we can not rub it in anybody's face on the field or whatever, but just kind of celebrate flying out of town with a win. Happy flight. Brought a positive attitude to the team that was great to watch. So that's all I got for you. Not so quick pinch hit episode, But those are my personal favorite players from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. Let me know if you agree with any of these, if you have other favorite players who I should have put on this list. Let me know on Twitter and Instagram. And until next time, I'm Jared, and this is the BFIBs Almanac.